I want to join my colleague from Hawaii in her remarks and her opposition to the AOT amendment. And I want to start off by simply saying that when we're talking about extending unemployment insurance benefits to Americans who have played by the rules, done everything right, through no fault of their own, find themselves unemployed, many long-term unemployed, and are trying to get a job, but still, despite an economy that is improving, hasn't seen the job market increase significantly so that they can achieve that job. What they need at this time is not a kick in the pants. They need a helping hand so that they can sustain their families during this period of time and continue to be in a position to do, which the law requires them, continue to look for a job and eventually find that job. So the reality is that this isn't a ideological battle, I hope, in a greater political war. It's about real people and real people's lives. And I don't think we can lose sight of that simple fact. Political ideology doesn't trump faith and family values. It does not trump reason or compassion or the acceptance that we're all in this together. Now, having said that, I'm encouraged that there's bipartisan support for repealing the military pension cuts. I oppose those. I'm committed to ensuring that our brave men and women and their families receive all the care and resources they deserve, both during their service and throughout their lives. They have fought for our freedom and security in the most difficult situations, and our nation owes them the same level of commitment, and we remain indebted to them for their service. But I've heard the senator from New Hampshire declare her support for offsetting the cost to fix that by fixing, quote, an egregious problem in the tax code. Now, as someone who sits on the Senate Finance Committee, I can tell you after years of being stymied by Republican opposition to closing any tax loopholes, to shutting down any abusive tax practices, I would like to have them join us in looking for savings in the tax code to achieve a bipartisan goal. But unfortunately, instead of shutting down abuses in the code, like the huge amounts of money stripped out of the United States and piling up in tax havens abroad, or instead of ending wasteful subsidies for very profitable companies such as the oil industry, or perhaps the myriad tax shelter used by millionaires to avoid paying their fair share, my colleague decided instead to propose legislation that would have a devastating impact on 4 million children who are U.S. citizens, and who deserve every right and every protection as any other child under the Constitution, all of who are deserving of our support. Instead of working with Democrats, many who have spent a great deal of time studying and pointing out waste, fraud, and abuse in the tax code to find a bipartisan solution, we are presented with a proposal that would go much further than she claims and hammer over 2 million working and tax-paying families. Now, what does the child tax credit do, which is the subject of her amendment? Well, the child tax credit is for people who have a qualifying child. That is the fundamental essence of the child tax credit. You are not eligible for it if you don't have a qualifying child. What is a qualifying child under the law? It must be the son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, brother, sister, stepbrother, stepsister, or a descendant of the filer. They must live with the filer for more than half of the year. And number 3, the child must be a United States citizen, a United States national, or a United States resident alien. It is the child that is the determinative factor. It is the child for which these resources ultimately we have decided as a Congress and as a society to support. We talk about being family friendly. We talk about the gap in the poverty situation in this country. We talk about the consistently growing gap in terms of the haves and the have-nots. Well, this amendment is only going to exacerbate that problem for U.S. children. Now, to eliminate the ability of a taxpayer to use a taxpayer ID number in order to claim the refundable portion of the child's tax credit ignores the fact that the vast majority of these children are U.S. citizens. And the child tax credit was enacted to help families financially care for their children. And the refundable portion was introduced because children in working families deserve the same support provided by benefits in the tax code as anyone else. And that's why we made it refundable, because we wanted to reward work and we wanted to help with the growth of that child and to deal with their challenges. Now, I agree with the senator from New Hampshire that the anecdotal stories that she included in her remarks amount to fraud, and they should be stopped. But let's be clear, the stories that she told of claiming credits for children not in the United States, or of 1,000 tax returns linked to 8 addresses, those actions are already illegal by whoever would make such a false filing, whoever would commit those actions. Now, in fact, what the senator does is cite reports of IRS investigators who did their job shutting down illegal activity. It seems to me that the IRS doesn't need her amendment to go after this fraud. They need the resources and the investigators to ultimately make sure that all elements of the code that have fraudulent activity being taken need to be dealt with. They need Republicans to stop cutting their funds so they can do their job better. But to use these instances of fraud that were successfully pursued to go after American children, that's not confronting fraud. It's disadvantaging children, 4 million children to be exact. You know, if we had one computer science company prosecuted for tax evasion, we don't bar all computer science companies from ever taking the research and development tax credit again. If we find one entity, one person, one industry committing a fraud, we don't eliminate all of the benefits of that code, the provision of the tax code for which they committed fraud, because we have decided that that provision is of a societal benefit. What we do is make sure we go after the individuals who commit the fraud. So it doesn't make any sense. Just like hammering 4 million U.S. children because of fraud perpetrated by some other unscrupulous actor doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I believe this amendment creates a clear-cut case of priorities. Surely nobody here would argue that outside of this instance, there is no other part of the tax code that allows waste, fraud, or abuse. We could sit down and find dozens of wasteful loopholes, fraudulent tax practices, and abusive tax shelters that could be shut down in order to pay for restoring the cuts to military pensions. If my Republican colleagues chose to support these efforts, I think this bill would sail through the Senate. So I say to my friends who are putting up obstacles, because I believe that a lot of these false choices that are being put out there are not for the purposes of a legitimate public policy goal, but really to undermine the efforts of achieving the extension of unemployment insurance. I say to them, I think you need to stop and think. Think about the people who are hurting. Think about their lives, their hopes, their struggles. Think about what their conversations are around the kitchen table at night. Every night in New Jersey and all over the country, thousands of families who have played by the rules and are looking for work, are sitting around the table asking heart-wrenching questions. How will we afford the mortgage and keep our home if we cannot get the assistance during this period of time? What do I have to decide between putting food on the table and keeping a place for my family? What if I have a health emergency? These are real-life conversations that are being had by Americans across this country. How are we not putting aside ideology and looking into our conscience for the obvious answer? A simple extension of unemployment benefits for those who need our help. It's a no-brainer at a time when so many need help now and don't care about politics, who don't want or deserve to be pawns in a political battle over the role or size of government. They just want help from the very people who represent them. It isn't a time for political games. It's a time for action. We can always argue deficits, we can argue debt management, we can argue politics, but for now, it's about the American people, their lives, their hopes, their dreams for a better life for themselves and their families. And it's about the kind of nation we are and the values we hold dear. Madam President, extending unemployment benefits isn't just the right thing to do morally, it also makes good economic sense. Study after study has shown that unemployment benefits are one of the most effective ways to help our economy grow, so much so that every dollar spent produces a benefit of at least $1.50 in gross domestic product. And that's because people receiving benefits spend the money, immediately stimulating the economy in the form of consumer spending, which accounts for 70% of our GDP. Leaving 1.3 million Americans in the cold without any assistance would end up costing our economy 240,000 jobs. Now, some on the other side say helping people who've been out of work is a crutch. I have to be honest with you, I have never met a person in my state who said they wanted to be on unemployment, who found dignity in being on unemployment, who found realizing their dreams by being on unemployment. They found their dignity by achieving a job that helped them realize their hopes and dreams and aspirations. The American worker is not lazy, and they don't want handouts. With the job market still recovering, there simply aren't enough jobs available for them. And as we work to make that happen, to make sure that there is an economy that has enough jobs for Americans to be able to realize their hopes and dreams and aspirations, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we continue to assist them so that those stark choices around the kitchen table aren't as horrible as they are today. I hope that my colleagues will oppose hurting 4 million American children, hurting and exacerbating the poverty in our country, sending a message that goes counter to what the Child Tax Credit was all about, that we want to help an American child be able to fulfill their hopes and dreams and aspirations and their God-given potential. The adoption of the AOT amendment would go entirely counter to that belief. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor